The expertise around the struggles of children in adoptive families needs to be understood by parents and adoptees alike. So the basic philosophy around that is that there's honesty from both ends, which promotes family health and well-being, and that environment of no secrets and truth. And these honest discussions really go a long way to help families live together as best they can.
Welcome to A Magical Life, Health, Wealth and Weight Loss. I'm your host, Magic Barclay, lead practitioner at Holistic Natural Health Australia and #1 best-selling author. In this podcast, I aim to give you practical tips on how to accelerate and sustain your health, increase your financial, spiritual and emotional wealth, and to look at something that haunts many of us needlessly, weight loss. Now, sit back and enjoy, because it is time for you to create and truly discover a magical life. Welcome back to A Magical Life. I'm your host, Magic Barclay, and today we are joined by Anna Maria DiDio, MSW, an adoptive mother who was inspired to write her memoir, Love at the Border, an adoption adventure after her own family journey to Mexico. Now her Life Adventures children's books feature stories about adoption, foster care, stepchildren, and all blended families from the point of view of the child. Anna Maria hopes that her books encourage open and honest exploration of what children are thinking and feeling within their own unique families. Anna Maria holds a BA in psychology from Villanova University and an MSW in family specialization from the University of Pennsylvania. She can be found at home in Philadelphia, walking everywhere, swimming laps, reading biographies, or baking chocolate chip cookies. Anna Maria's books can be found on Amazon, travel writing, and other essays on Medium, and more information can be found on her website, amddio.com. Welcome, Anna Maria.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And this is a topic that we've never covered here before, and I'm sure that, so many people haven't even thought of. But adoption really is such a great way to fulfill a family, to fulfill a child's needs. But there are so many, pitfalls and areas of concern for the child.
Yes, adoption begins with the traumatic separation. So it begins sort of with grief and loss. But as you said, it is just a tremendous way to create a family.
Great. Now, I ask all of my guests the same 3 questions, and everyone gives me such different answers, and yours are certainly coming from a very different way of life, being adoption, because I don't think it's spoken about enough. So here comes your first question, and that is, what can your expertise do to accelerate health, not just physical, but also emotional and spiritual health?
Well, the expertise around the struggles of children in adoptive families needs to be understood by parents and adoptees alike. So the basic philosophy around that is that there's honesty from both ends, which promotes family health and well-being, and that environment of no secrets and truth. And these honest discussions really go a long way to help families live together with as best they can. Adoption happens at infancy, and as in my case, we adopted an older child whose transition was quite difficult. So understanding all of these hurdles and all the things that adoptees go through is really important for families to grow in love together.
I'm guessing there must be, a fair bit of emotional turmoil, not only with the adoptee, but with the adoptive parent. You're changing your whole life to welcome another human being into your family, and they're coming with their own problems. Even if they're a baby, they'll still feel that detachment from their mother. Are there particular ways that you cope with that change? Is there, some coaching or counseling that you give other families, or can children find this in your books, ways of coping with the change?
Well, I offer some hints for parents at the beginning of my children's books. I'm just about to release the third book in this series, and each one approaches adoption in a little bit of a different view. But basically, I advocate that parents do a lot of research and reading and know what they're getting into beforehand. Count on the expertise of the professionals to acquaint parents with what hurdles will exist, and really be honest about what you can provide for that child. Secondly is network with other adoptive parents who have been through this similar sort of situation, and the support there is just tremendous. So those are things I totally recommend as far as families preparing for the adoption of whether it's a baby or an older child, as we did. It really will help.
Fantastic advice there. Now, we also talk about wealth here, and people think wealth is just financial, but it can also be personal and emotional wealth. So, what are your top 3 tips to creating wealth?
Well, first is acknowledgement of, in the situation that pertains specifically to adoption or foster care, is to acknowledge the background, the culture, the individuality of the child who's now part of your family. In our case, we adopted a 7-year-old girl from Mexico, and we visited Mexico 3 times and became acquainted with the caregivers at the orphanage that were just tremendous women. And then, just because they were such wonderful people, we stayed in contact with them. And that was really helpful to our daughter to have that link. We fully embraced her culture. We tried to incorporate cooking and events, and we took trips to Mexico. And as I said, kept in touch with the women there. So that created sort of a cultural wealth in our family that was just so valuable for our daughter. As you can imagine, 6 or 7 years old, she was going to bed one night in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and then the next day waking up in suburban Philadelphia. So it didn't take too long for her to completely lose her Spanish. And we supported her quest to reclaim her language, get back her language skills for many years, hiring tutors. And there was a bit of anger there. At one point, she said to us, "Why did you adopt me if you don't even speak Spanish?" And, that was really not part of what I was thinking at the time. But after, years, her participation in, of course, middle school and high school Spanish, and eventually college level, she's totally fluent and now very active in helping the Hispanic community where she lives. So that created a wealth. I just saw such a change in her identity, self-esteem, and what she was all about. So it's just being aware of specific personal, cultural touch points is very important.
That's beautiful. And that depth of understanding there, I just love that. That is really the true cornice. Cornice, is that even a word? I just made a word up. There you go, listeners. of wealth. You're giving her the wealth of language, the wealth of belonging, and the wealth of being okay with being Hispanic in a non-Hispanic environment. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, we thought it was critical. It's just, this is who she is. And we wanted to welcome that and embrace it.
Great. Now, our final standard question is around weight. Have you ever battled your weight? If so, what was the trigger to win that war? And what can you offer the listeners around stress, which we know is a key issue in weight problems? And I'm guessing the stress of the adoptive journey probably had a fair bit to give you to contend with.
Yes. When you're living it, looking back on it and to see the beautiful professional, just woman that she's become, we say, oh, wasn't that great? But, living it day to day was extremely stressful. She exhibited all the behaviors of what would all refer to as, primal wound, just all the getting used to her family. In the beginning, you think it's going to take just a matter of months, but it was years and years where she was constantly testing us as parents, testing our love, fearing abandonment. And we lived each one of those moments and it was very stressful. So from oh geez, from when I was a kid, I was always very active, just running, and I played basketball in high school and college and was a lifeguard, loved to swim. And so those became just sanity moments for me. And just the physical exercise. We lived in a very small town, which was just perfect for walking. And I can just recall just bursting out of the house and just going for a walk the many times that we had either heated conversations or difficult moments or decisions. I thought best when I was walking and talking to myself. And so I didn't necessarily have a weight issue, but it's the ability to move physically was very, very important. At one point, even before the adoption, was very stressful, and I broke my ankle, and for weeks I couldn't move really, and it created such a funny fog in my head, and it was actually like a little bit of a depression set in. So after that point, I never took it for granted again, and really just treasured those times to just be active and continue that. Just moving was so important.
Definitely. Now, let's get into the nitty gritty. Tell us about these books. What can people expect? What sort of messages are in the books? And why are you so passionate about these books?
Well, let me answer that question first, because after I wrote the memoir, I thought, there really is something more here to say. Yes, my experience was very valuable to write it down, and I loved telling it because it was really a mix of stress and fun and adventure and new experiences for our family. And that was great. But I thought, what's most important in this world now in terms of messages to children that are part of blended families? And that is one of acceptance and identity, and seeing that there is grief in a family that's lost. One thing that I have been just really passionate about communicating is that even the love of an adoptive family, everyone goes into adoption with the best of intentions. You want to create a family. In my case, it was due to infertility, and just the best of intentions. You want this family to be so wonderful and special, but that doesn't erase the family that is unknown to that child. So that child perhaps looks different than you, or depending on what age the child is added to your home. In our case, she experienced other loving caregivers, different foods, different smells, different environments. Here you're thinking, oh, isn't this lovely? She'll have her own room, and look at this home that we've created, and she'll be so happy. Well, it was so funny when she joined us. At one point, we actually had I said we kept in touch with her caregivers. One of them visited from Mexico in the very beginning, and she was telling her just she was bored. I mean, it was just so funny to me that she was bored in her house, and because she was used to living with like 50 kids. Can you imagine how fun that is to live with 50 other kids and always be playing? So it never even occurred to me that she would be bored. It was just so funny. So anyway, so my messages, there's a little bit of a different theme for each one of the books. The first book is recognition of what is lost in terms of family and then the recognition perhaps on the part of the child that there is a family ready, willing, and able to love you. And that's called Many People to Love. The second book is called How I Wonder Where You Are. And the girl in the story is looking around and thinking, who do I look like? I wish people would say I look like my mother. They say it to my sister all the time. The sister in the story is a biological sister. And just how does one reconcile the birthday of perhaps acknowledging that the biological mother is no longer in the picture? And the third book is about school anxiety and the anxious moments children feel who do not have English as their first language. So when children are asked to read aloud or put on the spot, there's got to be some love and understanding as to how children finally get confident in the classroom. So those are kind of the messages that I'm trying to send to parents and children alike, to discuss these things, acknowledge that these are some of the hurdles and issues that adoptive families must deal with openly, and open communication.
That is some fantastic information there. Now, is there something we haven't discussed that you feel the listeners need to hear?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is that one thing my daughter dealt with, and that is that people have the best of intentions. As I said, not only families, but other people have the best of intentions. And there are challenges not only at home, but at school. And one of the triggers that I've seen over and over that actually is in one of the books is that children are asked to create a family tree. And that is just a wonderful assignment. But for adopted children or children in blended families, that's not such an easy task. So again, the books are meant to highlight some of the areas, some of the challenges that it's no one's fault, but that kids face these things, and that, again, they be dealt with love and understanding. And together, parents and children can have the best possible outcomes and discussions when these kinds of things arise.
I'm glad you mentioned having those discussions. What does that look like? How do you sit down and start that discussion?
Well, in my experience, they're often prompted by a statement or a situation or a circumstance at school or after school. So there are, as I said, plenty of school assignments. There's talk on the athletic field or at gym class or at, this is your body class. Or at one point, I can only relate a story that happened to us. And, every class, every school has its health class where, this is how babies are born. And at that particular, I didn't know when that was happening, but my daughter came home just in shreds, in tears. And the other girls, were all relating the stories of how they were born at the hospital and their story of how they came home and such. So, that's something that adopted children need to deal with. And she was just so bereft and said she wished she came out of my tummy. And it was just, I could do nothing for, actually 2 hours. We sat there and just talked about that. It was sad. And I recognized that. And I told the story of us meeting her over and over. And it's just something that is prompted often without warning, but the books can somewhat prepare some of those situations. That's why I mentioned the family tree, birthdays, visits to the nurse's office where there is no family history, so no family medical history. Those are the types of things that will prompt a reaction, questions, and if families are prepared, they can be prepared for that kind of discussion.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Now, normally we offer the listeners a freebie, but you've got so many great sources of info. So I'm going to send people straight to your website, which is amdidio.com. You're on Facebook at anna.m.didio. Also on Instagram at amdidio. And people can find you on LinkedIn at Anna Maria DiDio. What can people find on your website there?
Well, there are links to the books for sale on Amazon, and soon they'll be, I'm getting another account so I can sell them in other bookstores and such, but they're for sale on Amazon. The links are there. Also on the website are links to Medium. I write different types of articles on Medium about either family life or some grown-up topics too. And on the website, there are some initial sketches from the beginning stages of the book. That could be a coloring book. And I also have some recipes that were our family favorites for our mix in cultures, Latin lasagna. Well, we called it Mexican lasagna, but in the book, it's called Latin lasagna. So a mix of what we tried to pull together so everyone in the family could have what they wanted to eat, and then some other family favorites that we enjoyed.
Yum. Sounds great.
I hope you try it.
Thank you so much for joining us. I think this has just been such an important conversation to have, and I really do thank you for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for such wonderful questions.
Well, thank you. And listeners, thank you for your time. We do appreciate and value your listening time. And, without further ado, please go enjoy life and really create your magical life. Thanks for listening today. Please subscribe to hear future episodes, leave a review, and share this podcast. Drop us a line at A Magical Life Podcast on Facebook and let me know what you would like to know more about. You can find us on Instagram at Holistic Natural Health, that's holistic with a W, or at www.holisticnaturalhealth.com.au. That's where you'll access all sorts of articles, freebies, and more.